In tonight's news edition, the Prime Minister says Jordanians need more than ever to stand together to protect the country as the Middle East is witnessing increasing turmoil. Palestinian and Israeli officials begin talks in Cairo as a new 72-hour truce takes hold in Gaza. And political tensions mount in Iraq after President Fuad Massoum asked a new Prime Minister to form a government. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, called on King Abdullah II Air Base in Zarqa. The King was welcomed by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mash'al al-Zabin, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal ibn Hussein, and the Royal Air Force Commander. His Majesty was briefed by the Commander of the Air Base about tasks carried out at the base, as well as combat preparedness of various military aircraft. The King also toured various sections of the base and inspected a number of newly introduced helicopters equipped with up-to-date military aviation systems. King Abdullah also inspected the air surveillance squadron and was briefed by its commander on combat and technical capabilities of the unit. His Majesty voiced satisfaction over the advanced level of the Royal Air Force has reached, as well as humanitarian missions it carries out. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein said technical and vocational training is necessary for youth to help them secure jobs in the local market and boost the competitiveness of the industrial sector. Prince Hussein spoke in a meeting with the President and members of the Zarqa Chamber of Industry, which also oversees the industrial sector in the northeastern city of Mafraq. President of the Chamber, Haydar Amaire, said the high-quality Zarqa and Mafraq industrial production had hit new world markets, having access to over 100 countries. The Zarqa and Mafraq industries, including Free Zone Industries, the Dlail Industrial Complex and the Mafraq Development Zone, account for over 50% of the national industrial output. Amari pointed to a cabinet decision to set up a new industrial area in the Zarqa Governorate. He said industrial exports in both Zarqa and Mafraq amounted to over $1 billion as they employ tens of thousands of local laborers. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said the turmoil in the Middle East is on the rise and that for the first time every household in the region feels threatened. This grave situation, he said, should bring us together and join forces to protect Jordan in order to cross to the shore of safety. The Prime Minister told presidents of professional associations that national cohesion, consensus and rational dialogue are now needed more than any time before. He said nations shelve their differences during the times of danger and crises. Mansour said it is not a coincidence that Jordan, through the unity of its people, had managed to weather the storm and withstand all attempts to undermine its security and stability. Mansour vowed there will be no retreat in the comprehensive reform process and said the country would forge ahead along that path, taking into consideration the turmoil around it. He also said all economic, financial and monetary indicators pointed that the country had improved, citing rising foreign currency reserves and falling debt. Now, in other news, Palestinian and Israeli officials began talks in Cairo to try to end the conflict in Gaza and lift the blockade on the coastal enclave. The indirect talks began a day after the two sides agreed to begin a new 72-hour truce. Hamas is demanding an end to Israeli and Egyptian blockades of the Gaza Strip and the opening of a seaport in the enclave. Hamas spokesman Sami Abu Zuhri said the new negotiations would be the last chance for an agreement. This report has more on the situation in Gaza.
Palestinians mourn the loss of another life. The man was killed in an Israeli attack just before the latest 72-hour truce came into effect. The peace has held so far, but Israeli troops are still positioned near the Gaza border. Israeli spokesman Mark Regev says they are ready to respond if provoked by Hamas.
We have accepted and honored 9 separate ceasefires that Hamas either rejected or violated. And if Hamas violates the current ceasefire too, we will of course be ready to act to protect our people.
For Gaza residents, it's hard to see an end to the violence when all they see is destruction.
My house was completely destroyed. Where can someone like me go?
The war has killed more than 1,900 Palestinians, most of them civilians, and 67 Israelis, most of them soldiers. And while Gaza residents return once again to their damaged homes, hopes are still high that talks in Cairo will soon bring about a lasting peace.
And in the occupied West Bank, dozens of Palestinians attended a funeral procession for a man who was killed in an Israeli raid on his house. Palestinians said 23-year-old Zakaria Al-Aqra was wanted by Israel and had been shot dead in a village south of the West Bank city of Nablus. They said 6 other people were wounded and part of Al-Aqra's house was destroyed by an army bulldozer. The young man was the 3rd Palestinian killed in clashes with troops in the West Bank in 4 days. Tensions in the occupied West Bank have run high during Israel's more than month-old war against the Gaza Strip. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden commended Iraqi President Fuad Ma'soom in a phone call for selecting a new prime minister to replace Nouri al-Maliki. Biden reiterated U.S. President Barack Obama's repeated calls for the timely creation of a new, more inclusive government that will be able to address the legitimate concerns of all Iraqis. Biden also reiterated U.S. support for Ma'soom as the guarantor of the Iraqi constitution. This report has more.
Political tensions mount further in Iraq after President Fuad Ma'soom asked Haider al-Abbadi, the Shiite coalition's nominee for prime minister, to form a government. The move was resisted by Nouri al-Maliki, who has rejected calls to drop his bid for a 3rd term as prime minister. Forces loyal to al-Maliki deployed in strategic areas of Baghdad and said the man replacing him as prime minister has no legitimacy. Al-Abbadi called on Iraqis to unite against what he described as the barbaric campaign waged by Islamic State militants. The naming of a new prime minister was welcome news for Washington, which pledged support for an inclusive Iraqi government. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the formation of a new government is critical for stability and urged al-Maliki not to ignite more political drama.
We believe that the government formation process is critical in terms of sustaining the stability and calm in Iraq. And our hope is that Mr. Maliki will not stir those waters.
U.S. President Barack Obama has urged Iraqi political leaders to bury their sectarian differences and form a more inclusive government that can unite Iraqis against Islamic State militants who control large parts of northern Iraq. The U.S. military has sent aid to the region and has also carried out airstrikes to help the Kurdish forces who are fighting the insurgents. At least 30,000 refugees have fled so far. Tens of thousands of others are still trapped on Sinjar mountain in northern Iraq since the Islamic State started its offensive. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
Turkish President-elect Tayyip Erdogan began the process of picking his successor as prime minister. Erdogan is seeking a figure he hopes will triumph in next year's general election and secure his goal of forging a powerful presidency. His victory in the country's first direct ballot for the head of state marks a turning point for Turkey. But the streets of Istanbul are split into 2 different opinions. Some disappointed, while others hope Erdogan would unite the country. Here's more.
A sea of Turkish flags on the streets of Istanbul as supporters celebrate Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan's presidential election win. It's a first for the nation. Erdogan's win makes him the first ever directly elected president of Turkey. Supporters took to the streets after Turkish broadcasters reported Erdogan won the election with 52% of the vote. That's 13 points above his opponent, Ekmelettin İhsanoğlu. The prime minister told his supporters the Turkish people had spoken.
The nation has shown its will at the end of the journey that was started on July 5th.
His supporters are thrilled with the results.
This is really nice. The results came as we expected. Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan is elected president.
But his journey is far from over, as Erdogan's opponents fear his election could lead to an increasingly authoritarian rule. Erdogan vows to exercise the full powers granted to him as president. His predecessors, however, have served a primarily ceremonial role. İhsanoğlu, the main opposition candidate, bid the prime minister good luck.
I hope this will be a good result for democracy, and I congratulate Mr. Prime Minister and wish him success.
After the victory is officially confirmed, Erdogan is slated to be sworn in as president on August 28th.
NATO said there is a high probability that Russia could launch an invasion of eastern Ukraine under the guise of a humanitarian operation. But Russian President Vladimir Putin said Moscow was sending an aid convoy into the country. Ukraine reported Russia has massed 45,000 troops on its border. European Commission President Jose Manuel Barroso also warned Putin against any military intervention in the country. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said there was no sign Russia had withdrawn the troops it had massed at the Ukrainian frontier.
There is a high probability. We see the Russians developing the narrative and the pretext for such an operation under the guise of a humanitarian operation, and we see a military build-up that could be used to conduct such illegal military operations in Ukraine.
Human rights group Amnesty International said U.S. forces who have tortured or killed civilians in Afghanistan have not been brought to justice. It cited failures in the U.S. military justice system. But the U.S. Defense Department said troops go to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties, and it took all credible reports of injuries and deaths seriously. Strikes caused more than half the casualties documented over the 5 years ending in 2013. Among them, many women and children, and families were still hoping for justice. In the report, Amnesty said at least 1,800 Afghan civilians have been killed by coalition troops between 2009 and 2013. However, it said only 6 cases against U.S. military personnel went on trial over the period. The human rights organization singled out the U.S. military justice system and urged swift reforms and accountability.
In numerous cases, there is credible evidence of unlawful killing of civilians, and the U.S., in many cases, has failed to conduct prompt, thorough, and impartial investigations.
Now let's go to Colombia, where the city of Medellin came into full bloom as scores of florists descended on the metropolis for a flower festival with a local twist, celebrating the art of floristry. Flower aficionados showed off elaborate floral arrangements worn on their backs as they marched on Colombia's second city. The annual flower parade is said to hark back to 1957, when a Medellin local invited florists from nearby villages to march in the city to display their colorful arrangements. The parade is the highlight of the annual Medellin Flower Fair, which sees parks, streets and gardens in the city blossom for 10 days every August. We begin with tennis. Agnieszka Radwanska claimed the title of the Rogers Cup in Montreal after she beat American Venus Williams 6-4, 6-2. The world number 5 opened the second set with a deflating break to quickly put the pressure on Williams, and then broke the dejected American to go up 5-2 before holding serve and finishing off the match with an emphatic ace. It was the first win of the season for Radwanska, but it provides a timely jot of confidence going into Flushing Meadows and the year's final Grand Slam, with 11 of her 14 career titles having come on hard courts. To Hungary and the World Cup triathlon. Rachel Klammer of the Netherlands came through to win gold in the event in Tiszaújváros, with Margit Vanik of Hungary taking silver and Pamela Oliveira of Brazil the bronze. The Vanik family celebrated the double success as Margit's brother Ákos Vanik won gold in the men's race. Klammer was 13th out of the water, but rode fastest in the bike race to move up into the lead in the run, clinching her win in 59 minutes and 31 seconds. Finally, a look at the weather forecast. Mild weather tonight across many regions with northwesterly light winds. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperatures will create relatively hot conditions across the hilly areas and hot elsewhere in the country, especially in the Jordan Valley and the desert areas as well. Winds will be northwesterly fresh, picking up at times, and further south, the Gulf of Aqaba should expect hot weather with northerly fresh winds and slightly choppy seas. Now a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And now our top stories once again. The Prime Minister says Jordanians need more than ever to stand together to protect the country as the Middle East is witnessing increasing turmoil. Palestinian and Israeli officials begin talks in Cairo as a new 72-hour truce takes hold in Gaza. And political tensions mount in Iraq after President Fuad Massoum asked a new Prime Minister to form a government. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Raad. Btoush. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.